Anyone can start.
Shall I start? Okay, so I'm Denise, I'm a leadership coach and I do lots of other stuff apparently, you told me this morning. And I don't know where I'm going to use this, no idea, but it will find a way to use either something will pop up where I'll use it. But I'm just about to write a book, so first outing will be interviewing some ladies, which I'll probably try this on.
You'll interview some ladies for your book.
Well, I think the ladies anyway, we'll find out at the end, so depends what they tell me.
So who's doing something different?
Okay, I'll go. So I'm Lisa. My primary job is market research. I do interviewing and focus groups, and I'm just getting into coaching. And I'm also in the middle of an MA in coaching, and so I'm going to use Clean. My intention is to use Clean interviewing when I work with patients in the interviewing context and where appropriate with the clinicians. But also part of my research is qualitative, and I'll be doing interviewing there, and I'm hoping to incorporate Clean into the research.
I'll go there. I'm Dina and I work for Trading Standards in Halton. We're working with some scam victims at the moment, so the team have been trained in clean questioning so that we can work with the scam victims. But I want to be able to do some measuring at the end of the project so that we can show the impact that it's had. So I'm hoping to use clean interviewing techniques with the victims at the end.
I was just going to say, Carol, have you had clean training before?
Not a separate course, no.
Okay.
Tasters, but not a separate course.
Great. So
No, nor have I.
there's 3 of you, and Peter, 4 of you. So there's different levels of clean training in the room. So some people have got lots and lots of clean training, and now they're looking at how to adapt it to interviewing, and others of you are incorporating it straight into interviewing. So just be aware of that when we run the small groups. So who's next?
My name's Andy. I come up from the south coast, so I live quite close to where Marion is, near Portsmouth. I'm an NLP trainer, but also coach and do lots of other things like most people here as well. I don't know specifically where I might use this, and yet any conversation can become like an interview. So it'll be interesting to see what these techniques are and do, and where I can incorporate them into my general day-to-day doing. So.
I'm Tina Mayfield, and I'm a trainer. I work a lot with young people that struggle to engage in learning and with staff to give them different resources to engage young people. A bit similar to Andy. I don't know exactly where this will fit in, but I know it will be useful because everything else has been.
I'm James. I work with Caitlin in Halton with unemployed young people. And I don't know when I'm going to use this, to be honest. I think Caitlin knows better than I do.
I'm Deshana and I'm from Japan, Tokyo, and I arrived in England the day before yesterday. And I'm a coach and also the hypnotherapist, and actually I'm have a clean language training, systemic modeling in Japan, and translating the Marion book with other trainer. So I hope that I can incorporate what I learned here to myself and work in my workshop with the clean language in Japan.
So hello, I'm Jan. I'm from Czech Republic, from Masaryk University. I'm a PhD student of education sciences and also lecturer and researcher in the university.
Yes, I am also from Czech Republic. We are colleagues, and we try to somehow incorporate clean language to the work with students, which are future teachers, and also in our research project we are investigate tacit knowledge of student teachers. So these 2 areas interested us.
I'm Jonathan from Preston in Lancashire, just up the road, and I work as a workplace coach, and I'm hoping to use clean interviewing to work with organisations to find out their organisational needs, to see how I can work with them, and I'm sure other things as well. I'm sure it'll be useful for other things.
I'm Carol, also from Preston up the road. I work with young people, teenagers 13 to 19, with learning disabilities and or physical difficulties, and I help them plan for the future. So I see using clean interviewing in that process.
Great. And then there's
Marion. I'm Marion. I will be using clean interviewing with a specific project to do with diabetes, and I am sure in many, many projects to come working with Caitlin. I'm Caitlin's business partner.
I'm Sean. I work from here doing psychotherapy, and quite often, doing therapy or coaching is interviewing someone. So I think, today, as well as doing lots of things, but I'm just kind of holding that frame of how to make every interaction a bit more sophisticated when you interview, but you're not really doing it.
Mm-hmm. So, as a bit of a background, my big thing at the moment is I realised when we did a workshop with James Lawley earlier this year about looking at categorising absolutely clean questions versus inherently clean. They're not part of the clean language model, but they're clean enough, versus questions that you have to ask because that's the interview remit. So they're not clean because you are directing their attention to to a specific area. To actually, that was unnecessary, that question there. That question's about what you were thinking. It's not necessary to the interview, it's not inherent in what they've said, and it's not clean. Okay, so it's a little besmirched, a bit dirty. To actually, this is a leading question and you are now pushing the witness or the researcher towards something that you would like them to say. So we were looking at this and I thought, hang on, we've been doing this for a long, long time in many different contexts, but I think maybe I hadn't realised how transferable it was. So more than 10 years, 15 years ago, we got a contract, our company got a contract with the Sheffield Police Training Authority, Police Training Centre, when they were working with vulnerable witnesses. So we had this categorisation of clean, inherent logic, leading the witness, and up this end, what you had was that officers, if they weren't very, very careful on video interviewing, the cases were thrown out of court because they were shown to have led the witness during the early interviewing stages. And then before every project that we run, we spend quite a lot of time on the telephone cleanly interviewing all the stakeholders around the corporation, so that before we go in and do a piece of change work, I've got a very clear idea of both what the CEO thinks, what these senior managers think, what these managers think, what these workers think, and I can get a nice shared model of what's going on in the organisation. So for all of these practices we use clean interviewing. And it's not the same as clean modelling. So when I'm cleanly modelling, so for example if I'm cleanly modelling Dina and I want to find out how she does working at her best, all my attention and my allegiance is to her. Her system, her model, how she works. And that's one frame of reference. But if I'm trying to find out how, if you were the team I've got, how each of you do it, I'm asking the questions not just for Dina, not just to find out how she works, but I ask them on behalf of the group. Because I have different allegiance, my outcome is separate. So I might ask slightly different questions because I'm looking for the transferability and the learnability of her model, not just to elicit the model for her learning. So that frame changes. If I'm going into mediation and negotiation, if that's the piece of work I've been engaged for because there's a war on, then again the questions that I ask, they have an allegiance depending on what I'm contracted to do, so I change them. So what we realised was actually we do all sorts of clean interviewing. It's not just one kind. So the reason we put the course together was to go, let's make this quite experiential. There are a few principles, but I think that the way that the course is going to come both practically for us and then also to give some guiding principles we can take into our institutions, our teams, is if we just do it. So let's interview for this kind of purpose, let's do it. What are the rules? Let's interview for this kind of purpose. What are the rules? And the thing that I'm particularly interested in are what are the skills that you have to have? And then what are the processes that you have to put people through for it to be a clean interview as opposed to some other kind of interview. So that's the purpose of the course. What would you like to know before we begin?
Short definition of an interview.
It could be a conversation.
Yeah.
What's the difference between an interview and a conversation? It is an information gathering thing.
Yeah.
Let's hold that. What's the depth of an interview? Okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to know before we begin? About anything, about people here, the process, the applications, the course?
What are the phases of the team interview? What are the phases?
Anything else that you want to know before we start?
A summary of the steps, if there are steps for the interview.
For me, it's about getting some of the whys and the why nots. So I know practically if I'm going to talk to someone else about doing clean interviewing, you know, what are the criticisms of this model and what are the real benefits? Because there must be times when non-clean interviewing is good, and there must be times when you want to lead somebody.
Will there be any written material to back up the experiential learning?
There certainly will be. There'll be some principles. Yeah. So we'd like them to be emergent to this group. What we're looking for are there general principles across the whole thing, or are those principles going to be particular to working with young people? Will they be different to if you're doing medical research, interviewing, or if you work with scam victims? Do they shift, or are there some core principles that actually apply to all of us? But they will definitely be written, and we'll send those out after this and before the next one.
I'm thinking, not directly a question, but I'm thinking that the purpose of the interview would impact on how the interview is conducted. So there's a lot of questions around that, how the purpose impacts on the procedure.
Mohammed?
Maybe important differences between a one-to-one interview and group interview.
Yeah.
For example, focus group.
Yeah, I wondered about whether we won't do group interviewing today, but we will in February, because I think it's a different skill level.
Okay.
Although I am doing it a little bit now.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, so I'm
It's all right. You've got a choice. Mohammed, everybody?
Hi, everybody.
We're just doing a little bit of what would you like to know before we begin. We have done some introductions, but we'll do some more for you in the break. So, what's the definition of an interview? Phases of clean interviewing, summary of steps, how the purpose impacts the procedure, why you would do clean interviewing, why you wouldn't, what are the benefits and criticisms of the model, the difference between one-to-one and focus group interviewing, and will there be written materials? Anything else that you definitely want to make sure we've covered or that you want to know before we begin?
Some applications, how and where it's been used.
Okay, because some of these I'll answer now and some of them we'll do as we go along. That's just so long as I know that that's what you're focused on. And we'll also have, after break, this afternoon break, James is available as well. So James Lawley's been doing lots of work with clean interviewing and written a really good paper with Paul Tosey, and so he'll be available by Skype. He couldn't come up here today, but he'll be available by Skype, so we can have a quick chat with him as well, get his perspective. Okay, anything else?
I would like to know what is cleanish, like cleanish in context or cleanish in contents, or yeah. It's easy to explain like a really absolutely clean and absolutely dirty, but yeah, somewhere between is hard to explain.
Yeah. Okay. Any more?
I'm just going to sit
Okay, so I'll just put them where I can remember them. I'll put them above Buddha. For you, what is an interview? What makes something an interview rather than a conversation?
Well, in my case, there's objectives set out by the client, so I need to learn very specific things from the respondent.
There's objectives. Other people?
Solicit information.
For me, it's what happens before you contract. And I guess it's a two-way, I'm thinking from a therapy point of view. So it's kind of, they're interviewing you as well as you interviewing them. So it's and what you both want out of that interview, so you can come to one of them so you can do that.
So, could I just paraphrase that and check I understand what you mean? That it's that you use clean interviewing rather than clean therapy or clean modelling to get a contract to ensure that you've got shared expectations for what the session's for.
Yeah, and I suppose, so this is a little bit about, I'm kind of thinking there's some things that if I'm interviewing someone, say for a therapy thing, that aren't negotiable. So I might have times, we've got a price, we've got boundaries that aren't negotiable, and some are. So it's kind of maybe sorting boundaries out and that, and they may be the same. Other people have their own boundaries that may or may not be negotiable.
In my job, it's about meeting my needs and not the other person. So I'm only interested in getting the information I want from them. I'm not interested in their experience of the interview. That would be different with the scam victims, but normally.
But that probably comes in with the objectives.
Yeah.
Is anything else that makes an interview in your world, as opposed to a conversation or a chat or a therapy session or a modelling session or an intervention?
So I suppose for me, interview is a word I associate with corporate. So I'm not in that, well, I interact in that world, but then I escape really quickly back into mine. So I think for me, that's a bit of a tricky one, seeing the word interview. I'm thinking of another word. So for me, it's a conversation between two or more people where there's a specific, I need some information. I don't, it's as general as that. And I'm not always sure what the information is. I might know some of the information I need to find, but sometimes I might not.
In that one, it's, so you might not use the word interview, you might use a conversation, but still it's got a frame that you need some information.
Yeah, it's a bit like what Sean was saying, you know, there's certain things that I need to find out.
Okay.
And tied in with what I first said and what Denise just said, is mine actually can be quite scripted. You know, the clients will often give me literally a list of things that I have to cover, and sometimes even how they want it covered. Sometimes I end up with a very full scripted 8-page discussion guide for an hour-long interview, at least. Yeah.
There may well be a balance.
Yeah.
For that to become a clean interview in the time you've got.
Absolutely.
And
that's where the challenge will be for me. Yeah.
And we may find that there's a certain number of questions you can manage.
Yeah.
Before it stops being a clean interview and becomes a mechanistic interview. That's that. Put a little thing on that, because I think that's probably some of my tacit knowledge about this. So there will be some areas of this that I know tacitly. There's some I can just tell you, and I've got a structure that there's definitely some stuff we'll do. But some of this is stuff I know from 15 years of doing it.
Yeah.
But that I might not be able to articulate until we start asking those questions.
For me, I think it's kind of it's more one way for me, as in information is coming to me. So it combines some of those things. I'm gathering information, whereas a conversation is more two-way. There's more of a balance with a conversation. An interview is more one way, with stuff coming to me or me finding out information to get an understanding.
Can I just add something as well? So sometimes an interview about me is something that happens in the silence. So I'll pick stuff up. So there's a feeling. I don't know. But that has an impact on probably what I say.
Yeah. So for some of you who process information with your bodies strongly, as Denise does, she's very strongly kinesthetic. So she might be interviewing not just with language, but also in what she's picking up is going on in the situation or in the group. Sean does that as well. I don't. Nothing there. Just words. But yeah. Okay. So.
Yeah, I think in that as well, there's something about the if you're interviewing for someone, you know, whether it be for a job or for an organisation or to do research, there'll be inherent cultural and political and sort of rules that are there. That how do you make those explicit so they can be clean? Does that make sense? Okay, so if I'm doing an interview for a charity I work for, and we're doing a job interview, one of the primary motivations of the charity is to positively discriminate for people who have had mental health issues and are now ready for that first start in the workplace. So we're positive, you know, that's our culture, is we're positively, you know, want to recruit for that thing because we think that experience is going to add more in the long run. But there might be things about if you're interviewing for a drug company, you know, they might want to know other things. There might be other cultural or political or economic things. So how do you make those overt, or do you need to make those overt rather than not overt? And what's the cleanness in that?
Okay, so I'm going to put that in a different place.
Yeah.
Because it's not so much what does that make an interview, but it's how do you make the political drivers or the client drivers overt?
Or the organisational stuff.
No, that's a good question.
You know, so whose outcomes are you working for?
Mine are quite clear, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
But the challenge therein is even if the outcomes are clear, it's the level of respect and consideration that you give for the interviewee or the respondent. And that can be from a healthcare professional point of view, but especially when it's with patients, it's a really difficult balance. And it certainly isn't always there in the scripted stuff I get. There's a clear lack of respect sometimes. Not always, but...
I also think a conversation can flow between becoming a conversation to an interview and back again almost. So if there's some intent behind I want to gather information, it could start off as a conversation, then you might find something you want to find out more about, and then it in essence becomes an interview, because you don't have an intent behind your question. Yeah.
And then, of course, people come in with their own intent, even if they're being interviewed on behalf of a company. Somebody may want to come in just because they want to talk about their condition, for example, which is often the case.
And that'll be the same. Dina will have that.
Yeah.
She may well have her outcomes that she wants to have met, but they may well want to talk about
other things.
Okay. So, if you just have a look at those, what makes an interview an interview? If you had to choose 2 or 3 key principles.
It's got an objective.
Yes, even if it's conversational, at some point you'll have an objective in that conversation. And then one of the questions is, do you reveal that objective? And how much do you reveal that objective to them?
But by asking questions around the objective, you're revealing the objective.
Yeah, but there's also, do you tell them up front what you're here for?
And that's assuming that the person being interviewed has the skills to look at the structure rather than the content. So,
do you mean by the structure rather than content?
So if I'm asking you questions about, I don't know, your shoe size, is you've got to then work out, is that to sell your shoes, or is it to do with some other health thing, or do you know what I mean?
Okay. It's the frame in which conversation is being held.
Yeah. And it's, are you making, so if the person's going to know, have they got to work it out for themselves, or are you going to be overt with what you're going to tell them?
So before any large piece of organisational change work, I'll spend a lot of time with the stakeholders. Usually modelling it out. They'll say, oh, we want our employees to give high quality feedback. You go, well, I don't really know, I can't make any sense of that. So when they give each the high quality feedback, what would you see in here? In order that what? So a lot of what, the way I use clean interviewing is you get a statement and I have to unpack what that means. So what will that mean in the future? What would you see in here? What's the aim of it? What's the experience right now? So I use clean interviewing to lay out a landscape to understand what's happening. But that's just with the leaders. And that's to get my contract sorted so that then I can say, this is what we've agreed, these are your objectives, this is what we're going to do, this is what's happening now. But then I stop, because this is systemic modelling, and then I have a very open frame that I then go and interview lots of different people in the organisation to check whether this is accurate or not. Now, I know that's what the leader wants, but that's just one node in my system. So then, I don't want to take this into my other interviews, because otherwise I'll start to frame to get the company to agree that that's what we need to have happen. So I then need to drop all that and come back, and I have a very blank thing, which I generally say, when you're working at your best, you're like what? An ideal team for you is like what? Currently, this organisation is like what? And if it were to evolve so that you could work at your best more of the time, that would be like what? And then whatever comes out of that, it becomes my information gathering source. I start to model, and then from that I take that back to the leaders and go, this is what's going on in the system, now what would you like to have happen? So I have different outcomes at different, so here I might be very open what I'm trying to do, and then I might be quite closed again. So it just does change where you are in the system.
Could you just repeat those other 2 questions that you used? So you said, you asked them when working at your best, currently this team is like what?
So when you work at your best, you're like what?
Okay.
An ideal team for you that supports you to work at your best is like what? Currently, this organisation is like what? And if it were to evolve so that you could work at your best more of the time, then it would be life court. They're just like, it's what's the blankest stimulus I can give to the organisation to find out what's going on. And some of them will say, I don't know, I'm not asking, I'm not telling you anything, what are you here for, what do you really want to know? And then sometimes you have to fill in some background. Okay. I'll do one more thing before we get up and do some stuff. So applications where it's been used. So I can tell you mine, but there's, I bet you know some that I don't know about. So applications where it's been used. So police interviewing. So that they already have good interview techniques, they already have good interview training. But when the police were interviewing, there was a case in the UK with a little boy called Damilola Taylor who was murdered in a lift on an estate. And they were virtually sure that they knew who did it. But because the children had learning difficulties, one of the children had learning difficulties who was being interviewed, the police pushed and pushed them to say what they needed them to say to make a case. And so because it was obvious that they'd led the witnesses, it got thrown out of court. And so nobody was prosecuted. And so what they were looking for was a cleaner way of gathering information without leading. So we spent 2 years designing and developing a police interviewing course in Sheffield, and now they incorporate that themselves, they don't need us anymore. It was a very interesting, a lot of the stories that I can tell came from that, because, and it's part of what we'll do today, the police would say, we always start every witness interview, we start with a blank slate. And of course I know that's not true. None of us start with a blank slate. It's not possible. There's no 15, 20 years of clean training, my slate's still not blank. I know what my slate's like, so I can account for it better. So a lot of the police interview training was what we're going to do this morning as well, which is the 5 senses, which is what are your patterns of making sense? Because you need to know these. You need to know what you typically do, because you've got to think about that if you want to be clean. You need to also ask the questions that don't occur to you. You need to pick up the information that's not obvious to you. So you need to know how you obviously make sense of things. So that's part of that. And then how do you, because what they were saying was, you've got to crack the witness, I've only got 40 minutes and I've got to get them to cough up. And you go, it's true, that's what they're... So they then didn't have any experience of a non-guided interview. They didn't think that they would be able to get anything because they... So then there's the skill of having an intention, so in their attitude, but a clean process, which is what we're going to be looking for. Oh, that's not great. So it's been used there, it's been used in some, so that's, we're going to be doing very much what we taught the police to do. Other applications, it's used when we did the J's group. Paul Tozy and Nancy and I used it in stakeholder interviewing and to research the effects of the before, during and after the process. So we were able to track how the organisation changed in terms of their attitudes towards each other, the amount of feedback they gave each other. So research on culture change has been used. Initial education training. So that was on, so working with teachers on when you're teaching at your best, you're like what? So both for trainees but also for experienced lecturers. So it's also research, but it's research and development in teacher training. It's been used in loads of places. Where else has it been used?
It's an integral part of what you do.
Yeah, but training attention. In our company, it's absolutely every piece of culture change, every intervention has clean interviewing in it. I'm trying to think of how to describe that in terms of an application.
So the stuff at Delta 7, where you're interviewing the different stakeholders about the development of the company?
Yeah, so Delta 7 uses it in... so Delta 7 is an interesting case because they used it internally to work out how to operate as a high-performing team. But then they also use it when they go out to their clients. They do huge pictures, beautiful pictures of change in large organisations. So they do huge watercolours. But it's the story of change. So they interview the CEOs and the board, and then they go out and they interview all the people. So if it were a rail organisation, for example, they'd work with the leaders and then they'd work with all the workers. And they need to make sure that the information they get back is robust. So then they can create an accurate picture of change that has everyone's voice in it. I hear my voice too much now. Any other applications that other people know about? Do any of the rest of you already use it somewhere?
There's the project that James did, that we were doing the
I know.
analysis on.
So it was used, James Lawley used it with interviewing coaches on their experience of being coached. So, I don't know, inquiring into coaching experience. And then there's a lovely one that happened in Holland called the Red Threads.
Minefield project.
The
Minefield.
Mm-hmm. So they were. Actually, I don't know lots of details about it. We can find out a bit more. There's two of them. There's Leben mit Wasser, which is the. In Holland, the waters are rising. It's reclaimed land, a lot of it, and so what they wanted to look at was changing people's experience and ideas about not fighting the water and keeping it out, but how are we going to change over the next 10, 20, 30 years to live with the water which is going to rise. So they used it as an interviewing project there, but they also used clean interview with lots of people, and they look for the themes that occur across the interviews, and then they call them the red threads, the sort of, what's the shared meaning of an organisation, what's the shared experience. I'll find out a bit more about that, but the Dutch girls have got lots of experience of that. I've talked to them a little bit. We'll get mini case studies from them between now and the next one. So how did they use it? And also I'm more interested in how did they train? Was it just them that did it, or did they train other people to ask clean questions? We'll find out about that as well. Okay. Is that enough applications? Mm-hmm. Loads and loads and loads.
I do know that one of my colleagues, and I didn't look into her research or dissertation, but I know that she used clean interviewing in the qualitative interviews in her MA dissertation research.
Which is name is?
No.
I've got it. I know I've LinkedIn.
I've got it in. I can look it on my phone later. Yeah, because I've got a copy of her dissertation.
And there's Rupert Meese interviewed for models for work-life balance. So he did lots of clean interviewing for getting that model. Clean language and research interviews. There's a paper there by Paul Tosey, which we just left out. You can all have a look at that. Okay. But you can also get it online if you want. We used it with long-term unemployed. So we did a whole lot of research with long-term unemployed before, and also with their advisors, the people that worked with them. So before, what was their, what did they want to happen? What's their current experience? What was the advisors' experience of those people? Then they did a systemic modelling training course, and then we re-interviewed them afterwards, so that we could be able to show that they'd moved on a scale. So we had scaling, but the interviews were conducted very cleanly. That was by Nancy Doyle. We did a whole school project where we interviewed teachers and kids cleanly. But we also backed stuff up with observation as well. Clean observation is an interesting one. We're not going to cover that on the course, but I think clean observation is another really interesting topic. How do you sit in a room observe it and start to count things, because of course once you've got a category to count things, you notice those things are not the other things. We work really hard at that. We sit together and go, if we're counting examples of challenge, what's Tashana consider challenge compared to me, compared to Mohammed? What are we all going to put a tick for the same behaviour, or actually is it all subjective? That's not for today.
There's the idea that you've had about researching this course as well.
Yes.
Doing transcripts.
Yes, so what we'd like, if you've got some transcripts of you interviewing and you can submit them to us, then we can rate them for cleanliness and dirt. And then we can look at them straight afterwards, and we can look at them 3 months afterwards, after you've completed the course and you've started to incorporate it and got yourself cleaner and cleaner. Which I think is also be interesting to, if we could get some tapes of your team on the phone, and then track that over 6 months.
And people start to phone up now, don't they? Can I do an interview with you about this cleaning? That's happened twice with me now.
Do they want to know?
Do cleaning, mainly students who are doing like therapy courses and stuff like that. It's starting to become a more referenced methodology from the academia side. So Barbara and Sarah and people like that at LGMU.
Yeah. Okay, so that's enough applications. So let's just do a quick little practice of a cleanish interview. So what I'd like you to, it's just a setup for the day. So if today were to go just as you'd like, today will be like what? And what you want you to do is to gather, so when you do a clean setup, it's not just clean questions you can ask, but also what would I see in here? Can I do what you do?
Sure.
So if today was to go just the way you'd like it to, Sean, today will be like what?
It'd be like having all of my skills in clean here, but the interviewing, particularly coming up as a peak.
So
like Mount Fuji.
all of your skills here and the clean interviewing coming up as a peak.
Like Mount Fuji.
Like Mount Fuji. So I can now ask him, about his experience, I can ask him cleanly, and then when they're coming up, like Mount Fuji, whereabouts are they coming up, and all your clean skills are here, whereabouts here, what kind of skills are those skills? Or I can ask him, if we're working together, so what would I see or hear today that would or what would you see or hear that would let you know that your clean interviewing was coming up as a peak, like Mount Fuji?
Ask me that.
Yeah.
So what I've kind of got is, so I'm kind of thinking, the thing I wanted to know earlier, the whys and the why nots. So, so as I'm thinking whys and why nots, all of that ground. So can you ask me the question again?
So what might I see? So when all you
what are you seeing here?
Yeah, when all your clean skills are here, and then clean interviewing is coming up like a peak, what might I see or hear today?
So you probably see me going like that, because that's my thinking face. But I'm not frowning, it's my thinking face. And I'll probably be comparing and contrasting, so you'll hear me say, this and how does it fit to that?
Okay.
And this, how does it fit to that? This, how does it fit to that?
So you can ask, I'm going to encourage you to ask 1 or 2 clean questions and then an evidence-based question. 1 or 2 questions and evidence-based questions. So it's today, if today were to go just as you'd like, so it will be like what? You'd like to be like what? To get the most of it, you'd like to be like what? Again, so clean questions. So this is an and or sensory. And what support or resources do you need? So this is a speed clean interviewing. We've not got a lot of time for it. And really what you're doing, you've got 2 outcomes. To find out a bit about the other person, but also to help them think about what it is that they need from the day. So it's a getting to know you thing, but more importantly, this clean interviewing is for them to go, what do I need to get what I need from this day? What support or resources do you need? And one of the things about interviews is your time limit. So for this exercise, you have 2 minutes for each way. So if I was working with Mohammed, I've got 2 minutes to ask him, he's got 2 minutes to ask me. 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Okay? So it's important that you do two things while you're doing these interviewing, is that you listen to them respectfully, but you need to be able to get a word in too. So you need to ask them at least one question, or make sure that you understand what they're talking about. Okay? So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10.
So we'll be doing the first bit,
Yeah,
yours,
do
and
this
then the
back
second
and
bit
forth,
each other.
yeah, so that you're kind of picking up from each other.
Okay.
And then you can learn from each other as you go along. So have a little look around the room, and if you're not, so raise your hands if you're not hugely clean trained.
Sorry?
Yeah, if you don't have a lot of clean training.
Yeah.
Okay. Make sure that you're not together. Go hang out with somebody else, just for this exercise. Right, so this is just 12 minutes. Quite tight. Get yourselves into pairs. And Marion and Sean, are you in or out?
I was thinking I was in.
Okay. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14.
Perfect. Perfect.
Right.
Great.
So I'm just here. So get up, find yourself a partner. You've got 12 minutes for the exercise. Somebody you don't know.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Should we stay here? One around together.
If today would be just as you'd like,
Things I need to do.
Okay, be clear, you'll understand the discrete things you've got to do. And when understand the discrete things you've got to do, whereabouts is understand?
Understand I think it's somewhere here. And it's either, if I'm understanding that it's comfortable here, if I'm not understanding then it's not comfortable.
Understanding it's comfortable there, not
when it becomes illuminated, I feel a little bit more comfortable and confident.
So when it becomes illuminated, you feel more comfortable and confident. Whereabouts do you feel?
With a tiny clean interview, gathering information about another person.
Quite to the point in ours. We got quite to the point about what we wanted.
Actually, as what Denise was saying there, for me, because I'd framed it as an interview rather than anything else, it did have more of a point to it, rather than just doing the exercise for another purpose.
I found it useful to ask the sensory questions.
So what did you find out with sensory questions?
They kind of give you a bit of kind of measure of what the person kind of saying. I think kind of concrete, but then kind of give a kind of factual kind of foundation that kind of supported the kind of clean language question.
Yeah. Okay, anything else?
I find it useful you saying 12 minutes. 12 minutes to me is like nothing. It's like microwave.
Yeah,
So it's not urgency, but it's like we've got this to do in a short window.
it's one of the skills we'd like you to practice after this day, is to set yourselves very time limited clean interviews. or I'm going to have a conversation with somebody, but I'm going to have a 4-minute interview to try and find out as much as I can find out about X, so that you can switch it on, point, and then switch it off. So we think that's, if you've got a lot of time, it can just be all rambly. And I think one of the things about clean interviewing is your ability to keep the other person on task while inquiring very generally. And I think there's that bind of attention is important. Yeah.
I think one of the other things, working with Carol, it reminds me that even when someone's never used, is not familiar with clean, they can have a location and straight in, and sometimes I go, oh right, yeah, it's a bit of a reminder because I've been using it a lot. I think sometimes we make assumptions that if people haven't got clean experience, they'll ask why are you asking me that, and they never do. So thank you for being lovely and
People have experience.
Yeah.
Have experiences. If you ask questions about them, they will share their experience, even if they don't know about clean. Yeah. Anything else just about that little bit before we go to break? Can I just ask Mohammed, but ask it generally? Being able to ask the evidence questions. What shift does that make for those of you who are used to doing clean modelling? What shift does it make asking evidence-based questions?
Yeah, it's pulling back my attention to our daily life context quickly.
Yeah.
For me, it's the difference between letting someone else understand himself and allowing you to understand them.
Answering the evidence-based questions about what's happening for you, so it then immediately gives you a moment when you're answering the questions where you become the thing in order to answer it, and therefore a marker that tells you when you're having it later.
Lovely.
You can scribble that in very small space. It's very interesting because when I was experiencing it, I was also wanting, ask that question because I'm having the feeling. But then I'll ask something about a C question that would then take you off in a different direction that would add to it. So.
Yeah. So that's a lovely little phrase. Let me pull that one out because it's really important for this kind of clean interviewing, which is a particular kind where I'm getting you to interview each other in order to help create a shared experience of you getting what you want. So my objective in that clean interview is that this group becomes self-responsible for getting what it needs in the day. That's my objective in giving it to you. And then in your pairs, it is about creating a marker now that will let you go, yep, am I getting it, am I not getting it? What should we do about it? Yeah. And then that's similar for doing something like a large scale piece of, because you can do a clean setup for 12 minutes or you can do it for 120 minutes. And when Marian's doing the interviews for the diabetes project, for example, and somebody's going, well actually when I'm feeling well it's like this, she might drop the other questions for a bit and really get them into that experience. What are you seeing and hearing around you, what's going on? Because what she is doing is creating response potential for them to shift into that behaviour in the future.
That's really clean though.
No.
Because I found myself wanting to do with someone who's working with Jonathan. He had when I'm not and when I am, and I was asking them, well, what needs to happen to become more like this one than that one. So I knew I was doing it, but I was immediately asking, had some intent in order to help provide some more resource towards the positive, as my interpretation of the positive resource, than they're not understanding resource.
So I think what needs to happen then
what happens just before,
Yeah.
where could that come from? Which would just be pulling backwards, but what needs to happen for X to move to Y, your allegiance is to Y, is that he should be more Y-ish. So again, it depends on what the outcome is
Yeah.
for the interview. I do expect with a clean set, if I do use it specifically to devolve responsibility, whether it's to a learning group or teachers or a group of young people or team, it's to devolve responsibility to the group for getting what they want. So I don't have to be responsible for them. Essentially. Okay, let's have a short break.
And when we come back, we're going to do the 5 senses exercise. I know some of you have done this before, and some of you haven't. The purpose of the next exercise, we're going to do a bit of modelling of what you're like as you make sense of each other. A bit of a, what's your slate like? If you want to have a cleaner slate to interview out of, what are your patterns for making sense of people when you're questioning them? So we'll do that straight after break. And it's lovely outside, so we'll open the kitchen, the French doors, or if you want to go out to the front garden, just feel free to just use the space. There's turkeys and chickens to look at in the garden if you want to look at them. And there is a dog, if you haven't seen already. Is everyone all right with dogs? She's a hypoallergenic dog. So she's a non-shedding dog, and she's pregnant.